We're going to move on to introducing Anna David. I'll get back to it. Relax. Anna David, ladies and gentlemen, is the New York Times and #1 Amazon best-selling author of 2 novels and 5 nonfiction books about addiction, recovery, and relationships. She's been published in the New York Times, Time, the LA Times, Vanity Fair, Playboy, Vice, Cosmo, People, Marie Claire, Redbook, Esquire, Self, Women's Health, The Huffington Post, BuzzFeed, and Salon, among many others. She's been written about in numerous publications, including Forbes, Martha Stewart Living, Entrepreneur, Allure, and Women's Health, and has appeared repeatedly on The Today Show, Hannity, Attack of the Show, one of my favorites, Dr. Drew, Red Eye, The Talk, the CBS Morning Show, The Insider, and numerous other programs on Fox News, NBC, CBS, MTV, VH1, and E! She speaks at colleges across the country about relationships, addiction, and recovery, and has been a featured speaker at 3 different TEDx events. Through her publishing company, Light Hustle Publishing, she helps industry leaders establish their credibility through books and, in the process, write their way to a bigger business. Through her online academy, podcast, storytelling show, workshops, and retreats, she helps emerging writers tell their stories, get published, sell books, and build their audiences. And ladies and gentlemen, we are very fortunate to have with us this evening, and it is my honor to introduce to you Miss Anna David.
Um, Thank you so much, Judge Johnson, for having me here. This has been an eye-opening, incredible experience, and congratulations. That was what you guys are doing is amazing, and it's an honor to be here. Um, if that sounded like a really long bio, that's what happens when you're over 18 years sober. We have a lot of time. All that time that we spent using, we start putting it into other things, and you get a bio that long if you're sober that long. So let me ask you this. Can anyone out there tell me what a light hustler is? No one ever can. So let me ask you this. Has anybody on the stage, off the stage, ever been through something challenging, come out on the other side, and told somebody about it? Raise your hand. There are people not raising their hand. Come on, you guys, we've all been through something difficult, come out on the other side and told somebody about it. Thank you. You are a light hustler, something you just couldn't define a second ago. And that's amazing, you know. And let me tell you why I'm so obsessed with this idea and why my company is called Light Hustler. I'm obsessed with this idea of we share our darkest experiences to find our light. And that means light in the spiritual sense, that means light in the humorous sense, it means light in whatever sense makes sense. And that means that our darkest experiences is where our greatest strengths come from, and that's where we can help the most people. Now, this was not how I envisioned my life. You know, I was a garden variety cocaine addict. I used from the time I was 12 years old, and it got very, very dark. I probably don't need to tell anybody what it's like when it gets dark. But it didn't start out that way, and that's the thing about drugs. It started off fun. People think that in recovery, oh, you hate drugs. No, I loved them so much that I did them to the point that they almost killed me. That was it. And so I thought I was just this fun party girl. And I had these great stories to tell. I had an experience. I went to Amsterdam when I was in college, and I ate space cakes. And I didn't think they were working, so I just kept eating space cakes and eating more space cakes. And then it's like, I don't know if anyone's ever had a space cake, but it's like the world doesn't go upside down. It goes like, it's being violently twisted by a demonic 9-year-old. It's like suddenly, I can't even explain. I ended up walking by a club that I heard playing Madonna's Vogue, Vogue, Strike a Pose. That song had just come out. It was the late 80s. And I go running into this club to, strike a pose. And I do it, and I'm a college student, and it's freezing, it's winter, so I throw off my hat and my gloves and my scarf and my backpack, and I strike a pose. And then I look around, and I realize this is not a crowded club. This is a restaurant that happens to be playing Madonna, and I have just run in, thrown off all my earthly goods like they were on fire, and struck a pose. And and that's, so I think, oh God, this, I don't think I'm a drug addict. I think I'm having fun. I think I have these great stories. And then, what happened? The stories got very unfunny. Very unfunny. And it ended, my addiction ended with me alone in my apartment with cats for company, 2 cats and cocaine for company. And I thought, I live in Los Angeles, so I was, of course, writing the Great American Screenplay. And I thought I don't know if there's any other creative people out here who convinced themselves that they needed drugs in order to, access their creative spirit. That's what I thought. And, I was following this time-honored tradition of dull your senses into near incapacitation so you can be creative. And what that looked like for me, but, cocaine started off, I was the life of the party, lampshades on, not literal lampshades on my head, but, having fun. And then the thing is, the more cocaine you do, the more it does the opposite of what it did in the beginning. And, the girl who was the life of the party suddenly became the girl who was in her apartment, completely convinced her neighbors were spying on her with binoculars. And being like, well, I have to pee, but it's just too much to get up. So I'm just gonna sit here. And I had a computer that if you didn't hit a key every minute, it would go like, do you want to save? And it would then be this beep. But to a cocaine-addled brain, that beep was like a megaphone inside a microphone inside my brain. And so I would just sit there and be like, okay, hit a key. And then it would be like, beep, and then you go, ah! And cocaine flying and cats flying. And I would just be like, heart racing. And then it would happen again another 58 seconds later. And that was my life. And I was so isolated, and I was so paranoid that everybody would know I was on drugs that it was just easier not to be around anybody. And I was so depressed that I forgot I was depressed. I just thought that's how life was. And I was so depressed, and I kept wanting it to end. But I was convinced I couldn't live without drugs. I was convinced of it. I knew they were killing me, and I was convinced I couldn't live without them. And so that left me with one option, I thought, and that was to kill myself. Because I didn't have any other solution. And I'd heard about recovery. I'd heard enough to know I wanted nothing to do with it. Oh my God, sobriety? I thought, okay, so that's where people go. They sit in church basements, and they drink really bad coffee, and they stand outside chain-smoking cigarettes, and the men all wear really boring sweaters. That's what I thought. Not here because it's way too freaking hot to wear a sweater, but everywhere else. And I thought, people just sit there and they talk about how they can't do the one thing on earth they love more than anything else. And then when the tedium of life gets so bad that they just can't take it, after a few years, maybe somebody turns to you and they're like,
we could go to a play. You know, I thought that was as exciting as it was going to get. I hate plays, for the record. And I just thought, I'm never going to have fun again. This is it. But I also knew something, which was I could always try to get sober. And if it was as bad as I knew it was going to be, then I could kill myself. But I couldn't kill myself and then try getting sober. So that's the amount of hope I went in with. And I went to rehab, and I got sober. And I didn't actually get a nudge from the judge. We were talking about that, and I actually did not. I certainly did enough bad things. I just was, lucky or unlucky enough to not ever get busted. And so I get into recovery, and I get into 12-step, and it's nothing like I expected to be. Nothing. I had thought it would be the end of fun, the end of life, and it was the beginning of life. And yeah, I do sit in church basements sometimes, and I do drink really bad coffee, and sometimes the men, they are wearing really boring sweaters. But I never talk about how I can't do the one thing on earth I love more than anything else. I talk about what it's like to live with a brain that told me that was the one thing on earth I loved more than any other. And I thought, once I found recovery and saw it was nothing like I expected it to be, I realized I was nothing like I expected myself to be. I'd always fancied myself this very, very cool and very hard, and I realized, no, I had to craft that persona because I'm so sensitive that that's what I needed. And I'm not that cool. I'm really into reading books, That's so I had just crafted this person that I really wasn't. And I noticed something else. And I don't know if you guys have noticed this, but sober addicts and alcoholics are some of the smartest, funniest, most motivated, most ingenious. I mean, we had to do some scheming to get our drugs. We're some smart people. And we tend to be funny. I laugh harder in those meetings than I ever did at parties. And until I got sober and identified as a sober addict and alcoholic, I didn't think of myself as smart or motivated or funny or any of those things. But when I did, when I started to see those commonalities among all the sober addicts and alcoholics I was meeting, I started to go, well, maybe that's me too. And I thought, there are so many people out there suffering with this disease who are exactly where I was. I got sober in the late 90s. There were no sober bloggers, sober Instagrammers, anything like that. If you went online looking for information about recovery, this is where Charlie Sheen went to rehab. There was nothing else. And so I thought, had I known what recovery was going to be like, I would have done it years before. I wouldn't have had to go as low as I did. I wouldn't have had to contemplate suicide. And I thought, recovery has a really bad public relations problem. And it is my duty, now that I've come to the other side, to start telling people what it's really like. And so I sat down and I wrote a book about it. And that book, Party Girl, came out right when all these starlets were sort of making news for being party girls. And so that's how I started getting asked to go on the Today Show and Fox News and all these places and talk about the party girl phenomenon. And then that led to 7 more books. It led to speaking at colleges, TEDx, going on lots of TV shows, writing all these articles. And in the process, I started to become known as this big recovery advocate. And as a result, started to get emails and direct messages from people all the time that say, you're so brave. I am going to lose my family and my career if anybody knows I'm an addict, but because of your bravery, I am going to tell people. And I would just sort of accept that and be like, wow, I'm just naturally really brave, I guess. And then I realized something. It's not brave if you're not scared. And I just wasn't scared to talk publicly about addiction. I don't know why. I mean, I'm from Northern California, where in this family where we talk about everything all the time. I live in Los Angeles and I'm a writer, so most people would expect me to be a drug addict. And I wasn't ever gonna lose a job because of my addiction. If anything, I was gonna get one. And I've also always been what I like to call a chronic confessionalist, you know, always telling everybody my business, whether they want to hear it or not. And you know, it's like when I got out of rehab, I remember I went to a restaurant. Waiter came over and was like, "Can I get you something to drink?" And I said, "Yeah, I'll have a Diet Coke." And he starts to walk away, and I'm like, because if I ordered a drink, you know what would happen? Then it would be shots, then I'm calling my dealer, then it's like the birds are chirping, I want to kill myself, and I'm like, how did this happen again? And he's just like, Diet Coke's on the house. You know, that's me. I just tell people things. And so I accepted these like accolades for being a brave person. And it was starting to dawn on me like, maybe they're wrong. Maybe you're not that brave, but I accepted it anyway. And then something happened. I started to go through a really rough time. It was about a year ago. It was just a breakup, but it triggered all my trauma. You know, I had a lot of trauma in my youth that I had been stuffing down. And, you know, that can happen. When we're ready for it, it'll come up. We never feel ready for it. But suddenly I'm just crying all the time. I'm mourning all these things that happened to me. And I was crying so hard, for months. You know, I was walking home from work one day, and a homeless guy shuffles by me and is like, are you all right? And I looked at him, I was super embarrassed and defensive, and I was like, yes. And he goes, you don't look all right, and shuffled off, you know, and I was lower in terms of my mental state than I had been before I got sober. And it happened, I had a book coming out, and so I had to get out there and promote it. And I said to my friend, I don't think I can do this. I'm crying all the time. You know, it's embarrassing. I don't want people to see me like this. And she looks at me and she goes, I don't get you. You know, you're a light hustler. You're out there telling everybody they got to share their dark to find their light. And now you're going through a rough time and you don't want anyone to know? And that's when I really realized I'm totally full of it. I don't really want to be vulnerable. I want to feel better than other people. I want to be like, oh, you know what, I struggled, but that was practically somebody else. You know how you're struggling now. Oh, I get it. That used to be me. Now I'm great. Now I'm perfect. I never wanted anyone to see me struggle. And that's where true bravery came in. And I never wanted people, I had these things I was ashamed of. I was ashamed of the fact that I suffered from depression and that I'd been, you know, medicated for it. And I didn't want anyone to know. Like, I think addiction I thought was sort of sexy, but nothing sexy about depression. And, you know, I had other things I was ashamed of. I'm ashamed of the fact that I'm the age I am and I've never been married. Never even been proposed to, by the way. I had all these things. So that may not seem shameful to somebody else, and that's kind of the point. We all have our little shames all over us, and we don't talk about those things. And you know what it does? It constricts them. It makes them worse. And so this happened, this book comes out, and I wanted to cancel everything, and I had to do a video interview. And so I sign on and it's a friend of mine who's interviewing me, and I sign on and I just go, you know, Tommy, I just got some really bad news, which was a lie. You know, I had gotten bad news from my brain because I was constantly depressed during this period, but he goes, I'm like, I don't think I can do this, and he goes, don't worry about it, Anna, we're all rooting for you. And I realize I'm not talking to Tommy, but to the hundreds of people who have already signed on, and this thing that I didn't want anyone to see me struggle, that, you know, they all saw me. And so I realized it was time for me to bust out and really be that person people thought I was. And this happened at the same time that some famous people, it was about a year ago, made headlines because they killed themselves. It was Kate Spade, the designer, and Anthony Bourdain, the TV personality and chef. And the stories came out the way those stories come out, big, headlines and all these social media posts. And then the truth, which was from their loved ones, which was in both cases, it was said they didn't want anyone to know they were struggling. They were ashamed. It was bad for the brand. So they carried that shame, and that killed them. And I'm not saying that everybody needs to go around and get on stages and write books and start podcasts where they're talking about their addiction and their depression and whatever it is that brings them shame. But I am saying you need to tell somebody. Because keeping it inside, it just strangles it. And telling somebody, it just pops the air out of the balloon. So that's my message. In addition to being so impressed with all of you and wanting to congratulate you so seriously and the loved ones, it's so nice to see this kind of support. But if you're struggling with anything, if you have anything that brings you shame, tell somebody. Because you don't know how much you may be helping them, so they'll tell somebody else, who will tell somebody else, and it starts this domino effect. And people hear not just about recovery, but recovering from anything. So please, tell somebody that thing you don't want to tell them, because it may save a life, and it may even be your own. Thanks.